What's up, folks? Maximilian here. Welcome back to another episode of Real Talk, taking some things that have recently happened within the fighting game community and the release of all these fighting games that we have at our disposal now, and talking about something that has happened over the past week, and is a game that I have done some coverage for, and I think is pretty damn awesome, and I wish more people have played it or will play it. And it's Darkstalkers. So, for many of you guys that don't know, Darkstalkers Resurrection came out last month for Xbox 360 and PlayStation Network, and it's essentially a remake of Darkstalkers 3 and Darkstalkers 2, HDified, made by the Iron Galaxy guys, and essentially has some of the best netcode of any fighting game out there right now on console. It's really amazing, and between that game and Marvel vs. Capcom Origins and Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, I'd say Darkstalkers is definitely the best package out of all of them. But what I wanted to talk about today was kind of the oversaturation of fighting games and what has happened with Darkstalkers Resurrection. A lot of people, the things have been said before that Darkstalkers Resurrection is a testing tool to see if people are actually interested in a game like a fully fledged new Darkstalkers title, aka Darkstalkers 4. I've actually made another episode way back in the day of just talking about this, talking about Darkstalkers 4 and what I think it needs to be successful, at least for me personally. Because one of the biggest allures of those games, and I went into much detail about this, was the sexuality of the original Darkstalkers games. It was pretty much boobs and the crazy monsters and stuff like that, but it never had a really hardcore following like Street Fighter. It was always that game that was next to Street Fighter that was pretty cool, but everyone really just played Street Fighter, you know what I mean? But for the most part, the later Darkstalkers games like Vampire Savior, Darkstalkers 3, and beyond are just totally awesome, and the system in these games, I didn't know until Darkstalkers Resurrection came out because I never really played them that much. It's just so much damn fun, and it is a really, really, really competitive and awesome fighting game. And the big issue that happened as a result of all this was that Darkstalkers Resurrection did not perform well at all. Even though it made the top 10 of the PlayStation Network selling, I don't think it met the budget expectations of what Capcom put it up to, and the recent VP of Capcom USA came out and said that the sales expectations for Marvel vs. Capcom Origins and essentially Darkstalkers Resurrection especially did not perform as they wanted. Who knows what they wanted it to do, but essentially it's not making them money. And what's going to come of this is that pretty much there's going to be no Darkstalkers 4. When it comes to Capcom Japan and a lot of these Japanese game developers now, especially with the situation with Square Enix and stuff like that, a lot of these Japanese game devs need this hard evidence that we need to sell 2 million units or else it's just not worth it, which is absolutely ridiculous in my eyes. That's just poor management, in my opinion. But what this means is, since Darkstalkers Resurrection didn't perform, they do not have any hard evidence to go to Japan and tell them, yeah, there's a huge fan following for these types of games. Let's go ahead and make Darkstalkers 4. Let's make it gory. Let's make it sexy. Let's do all this. Let's make it M-rated. I really want Darkstalkers 4 to be the Mortal Kombat of Capcom fighting games. You know what I mean? Make it dark, make it gory, make it awesome, and just... it's never going to happen. That's essentially what this comes down to, is that it's never going to happen. Is that these HD re-releases from Capcom, the last couple of them that haven't been Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, have just not performed well. And a lot of people are blaming an oversaturation of the market, an oversaturation of these HD remakes, oversaturation of just way too many fighting games. If you honestly think about it, this console generation is the greatest video game generation ever for fighting games. Take into account all the new fighting games that have been debuted on Xbox 360 and PlayStation Network, or even the Wii. Take all of the HD re-releases that have come out. Take all of the old games that have come out on all these variety of systems, and you literally have one system that ends up having so many damn fighting games throughout so many years and years past that it's just ridiculous. If you have an Xbox or if you have a PlayStation right now, or PS3, you have the ultimate fighting game system, because almost every single fighting game you could ever want is on these consoles now, and you have good arcade sticks and stuff like that to play it. But I still don't think it's an issue of oversaturation, because fighting games still perform. Even though some things don't meet the sales expectations that a lot of people want, some games that have a lot of a huge fan following will do well, even though... And here's the issue why Darkstalkers didn't do well, and there was a huge hubbub after all this stuff, and all these people pointing fingers of who didn't support Darkstalkers and what the hell is going on. No, I think the big issue is that the target audience for this game was small. The target audience for Marvel vs. Capcom Origins was small. These two games specifically were targeted towards people that hopefully had a passion for those games in the past. But the bigger issue is that there was a pretty niche audience that really liked Marvel vs. Capcom 1 or Marvel Superheroes. And there's even probably a bigger niche audience that just loved the hell out of Vampire Savior outside of like the competitive tournament guys. Those guys represent a big part of it, but what you really need to appeal to is everybody else, that you have something to actually sell. And the big issue is that with MVC1, Marvel Superheroes, and the Darkstalkers games, you don't have that big of an environment to sell to. And that's what I was really worried about with Darkstalkers Resurrection, and I remember talking about this quite a bit, is that I don't know who this game is going to be for besides guys like me and maybe some people watching this, or anybody that's extremely competitive with the game, because Marvel Superheroes, I didn't even know existed back in the day until someone showed me. I knew about X-Men Children of the Atom, but MSH was just like, whoa, this is a Marvel Superheroes game by Capcom? I had no idea. It was kind of niche even back in the day. The same thing for Marvel vs. Capcom. MVC1 was really beloved, and everyone loved it when it was out, but it was only out for about a year, and then Marvel 2 came out and completely trumped it. Like, people that casually play fighting games, or even just in general tournament players, just gave the F up of Marvel 1 completely, and Marvel 2 was the, lo and behold, celebrated amazing fighting game that we know to this day. And it sold ridiculously well on Xbox Live and PlayStation Network. It was huge. It was one of the best-selling titles ever. And it's not that surprising that not that many people cared about Marvel 1 anymore, because the average audience only knows about Marvel 2 and its huge roster. Why would you care about Marvel 1 when the roster in Marvel 2 is like 3 to 4 times bigger and there's way more shit that you could actually do? Kind of makes sense, right? Essentially with Darkstalkers, it's the same thing. It was always a really niche audience that loved this game, and it was the brand of Darkstalkers. It was the characters that were always really popular and beloved by so many, and not as much the games. Even the games in the past didn't really have that much of a following, so I don't think that these games underperforming and the fact that we're never going to get a new Darkstalkers game is to the fact that the fighting game community right now is saturated with just way too many fighting games. I don't think that is the situation. The huge hardcore followings will follow these things, but appealing to the majority of the audience is how you get a lot of support for the game, and like sequels and updates and patches and stuff like that. And that just didn't happen with these titles because, like I was saying, it was a pretty niche following in the past. So this is kind of like separating the hardcore audience and the people that really love something to the overall general community perspective. And when it came to these games, I completely endorse the fact that they're releasing them because I absolutely love them. But if Capcom specifically released games like, I would say, Street Fighter Alpha 2, Street Fighter Alpha 3, Capcom vs. SNK 2, if any of these titles actually got releases, it would be absolutely huge. Those games would sell a lot. I believe they would, because people remember them, and a lot of people played all of these games back in the day. If you released like CVS 1, I don't think anybody would care at all. Essentially, the big titles that everyone played were Super Turbo, between the Capcom variety, Super Turbo, Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, and Marvel vs. Capcom 2, and CVS 2. And Alpha 2 and Alpha 3 were in there as well. If they released like CVS 1 or Alpha 1, no one would care. It's just kind of like, why? Why would you do that? If they released X-Men vs. Street Fighter, that actually might be a lot more popular than Marvel Superheroes and Marvel vs. Capcom, because X-Men vs. Street Fighter is a lot different than MVC1 is, and MVC2, so I don't know. It's just one of those situations where I don't think the market was completely saturated or is completely saturated. I hope there's going to be more fighting games and more HD releases of fighting games. I just think the choice of Darkstalkers and Marvel vs. Capcom 1 and the result of them selling not very well isn't the fact that those games were bad. It's just the fact that the competitive environment for those games and the fan following just isn't there. It just wasn't there for those titles back in the day, and they were only popular for a brief period of time until they were completely trumped by their sequels, so it's an interesting situation. So thank you guys very much for bringing up this topic. I actually brought this up on Twitter and Facebook for the next Real Talk episode, and if you guys have anything you'd like me to discuss in a later episode of Real Talk, go ahead and leave a comment below, or a comment on my Twitter or Facebook, and hopefully I'll tackle it in a later episode. My name is Max, and I'll see you next time.